But let's jump into it, man. Harrison Barnes, let's start with him. I believe you and I both think that he is probably going to be in the starting lineup going into the season. I think just like we saw last year, what we start with may not be what we finish with. But to start the year, I think whenever we went over our rotations, just kind of previewing the rotations, I think that was sometime last month or after free agency when we had the roster like finally settled.
Mhm.
Um, we had Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama. So, with that lineup in mind, I'll just dish it to you, man. What are your thoughts on how Harrison Barnes fits into the team? And then also his versatility if maybe we play him at the four off the bench.
I think his fit is seamless. The same positive that we had with Julian Champagny starting is the same positive with him starting in the sense that he is a 3-and-D guy, right? But he's going to do every other little thing correctly where Julian might not have. I think he's an above average level defender at the NBA level. He's obviously 6'8", long, lengthy, very versatile defender, can basically switch 1 through 4 at this point in his career. He can play small ball 4, but he's also like a very solid 3. He came into the league as a 3. And what's interesting to me, Jude, is he was the most efficient scorer of our small forwards last season at 47% from the field, 39% from 3. That beats Keldon. That also beats Julian from both field goal percentage and 3-point percentage. And I understand that, yes, he played with some better players and Sabonis and Fox last year, and he was not the focal point of the offense. But I'm excited to see if he can kind of get back to what he used to be early in Sacramento, as well as with the Mavericks, who he shared a short stint with, and then obviously as a young player in the Warriors, where he was always either the second or third scoring option and showed you a lot of versatility as a scorer, as an off the ball scorer, as a post up threat. And we really didn't see that last year in Sacramento. He was really relegated to just shooting threes and maybe the occasional bucket if things got really bad for them. So on this team as a veteran presence with that mindset as a connective piece, maybe he can kind of unlock some of that old school mentality that he used to play with back when it was required from him.
I think that's a great point, and that's exactly where I was going to go with it, right? You're going to have Devin and you're going to have Chris Paul with the ball in their hands a lot. I know we
Yep,
talked about how Devin's going to have, a lot more off-ball opportunities in our last episode, but still, Devin Vassell will definitely have the ball in his hands more than a Harrison Barnes per se.
for
And then
sure.
on top of that, you've got Victor, who is
Yep.
going to have his hands or the ball in his hands a lot. And it just kind of reminds me of that role on the Warriors. Like he is going to be someone who's spacing the floor, playing off the ball, placing himself in a good place. And also, he's not somebody that the defense can sag off of either.
Correct.
So I think that's going to have a lot of other impacts in the lineup. But when it comes to just, I guess, his offensive fit, really, I just see him as mainly a shooter. I'm
hmm
sure we'll see some drives and some dunks from time to time. And then defensively, we just need him to be connective, be a good communicator. I mean, he's really just, I don't want to, go too over the top here, but he really just feels like the perfect role player, at that three position for this young group.
He's exactly what we were talking about early in the offseason. We were discussing Spurs needs, and it was like maybe we can find someone who's kind of on the downside of his career that's okay with a small role that can fill that need. This is exactly what Harrison Barnes is. And the difference between him and Julian is not marginal. It is significant. Like to say it lightly, no disrespect
Right.
to Julian, but it is a drastic change.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that I was thinking about with Harrison is not just the stuff that he's going to be able to teach some of the other guys on the team that we talked about. But dang it, I'm blanking. There was something else I was going to say, and I was kind of just throwing that around there to see if it would come to me, but
Mm,
it didn't, unfortunately.
that's okay. I only have one last thing to say about Harrison Barnes, and kind of the
I
drawback.
remembered it, but go ahead.
So I was going to say the drawback with Julian again was that he never really put the ball on the floor. Defenses could play him one way and one way only, and he's only going to shoot threes. Harrison Barnes, you have to worry about him as a basketball player. He can put the ball on the floor, he can make the right play, and he can score on his own if that's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And if we leave him open, you
He's going to
mentioned
lace it.
the 3-point percentage and all that stuff. I mean, really with him again, the connectiveness on both sides of the ball as well as the experience. is just going to be invaluable for this team. Then the other thing that I was going to say that I just forgot a little bit earlier was, as much as he is technically on the the later side of his career. I just checked his birth date, and that's May 30th of next season. So he's going to be 32, most likely, unless the Spurs go on some improbable playoff run. He's going to be 32 years old for the majority of the season,
Mm,
which is still, what a lot of people would consider like the prime of players, as much as it is maybe the last year or so.
right. No, he's not old. I hope
Right.
that wasn't what I said, but he is a veteran presence. But he still has a couple of years left of being a solid contributor.
Yeah, because I was curious. I was like, is he 34? Or I thought he
No,
was closer to 31, 32, and that's what it is. So, not somebody who is just not Chris Paul. I'll put it that way.
no,
And not to diminish what Chris Paul is going to bring to this team, but big difference between 39 and 32.
for sure.
And let's see, we got a comment here. Cowboy Tanaka, who is watching late from the EU. We appreciate you
Wow.
being in here, my guy. What's the percentage chance that Barnes will play the best season of his career?
Ooh, I would say 3% chance. That's being generous, only because if we're just going to base it off stats, it's going to be his first year in Dallas, where he averaged 19 points a game,
Right.
5 boards. I think he was like the number one contributor outside of Dirk. That might have been, was that Luka's rookie year? I think that was the year before Luka got there.
Yes,
But
I think you're right.
anyway, and then obviously you have a dynastic run with Golden State where he won a ring and then had the greatest record of all time. So I'm going to say 3%, and that's being very generous.
Yeah, I think the Mavs point that you just made there, it's hard to top that, as well
Yeah.
as just as much as, we like the supporting cast around Harrison Barnes, and we were just kind of talking about how, those guys can maybe get him open looks, by the attention that they draw, especially with CP3, Devin, and Victor, and even Jeremy to an extent. We'll probably
Yeah.
see him with the ball in his hands from time to time, just like we saw last year, even when he wasn't the point guard anymore. Oh man, I don't. I'll go
You
with
lost it
you.
again? Oh, yeah.
No, no, no. I'll go with 3% on this one. But what I will say is, maybe this will be up there whenever it comes to it, his. I don't know. I was gonna say him as a
His
role player.
legacy?
Him as a role player.
Mhm.
Him as, maybe. Here's a better way to put it. He'll do the little things that don't show up on the stat sheet. This might be the year where those things are highlighted more than maybe years past.
You know what I'll say? If we can get into the playoffs somehow and he's a really solid contributor, this could be like what Steven Jackson's We Believe Warriors was for his career. Because Steven Jackson was a better scorer in Charlotte, but they sucked. And then he won a championship with the 2003 Spurs, which is like him with the Warriors. But then the We Believe Warriors, the second go around, or no, with the Spurs, sorry. The We Believe Warriors, he wasn't a great team. I think he's the eighth seed, but they beat that first seed Jazz or
Mhm.
first seeded Mavericks. God, I'm all over the place. They beat the first seeded Mavericks. If he can do something like that, that it speaks well to his legacy.